I'm Denise Quashie, and I run the Startup Growth Program for AWS. My role is to help early stage startups move from just having an idea to launching and scaling their startup. I do this by creating content and programming that runs both digitally and as in-person events. And that furry creature you see on your screen is my dog, Frankie Beans, and the inspiration behind my startup. Prior to my role at AWS, I was a founder just like you. My startup was a mix of education, programming, peer-to-peer networking, and a technology platform that helps social influencers with pets monetize their social channels and blogs with brands. I ran that for about 5 years until it was acquired by a media company. And now I'm here at AWS helping other entrepreneurs scale their ideas. I, like many founders, was a non-technical solo founder that initially bootstrapped my business. So I truly understand how challenging it can be to get up and running with scrappy teams and tight pockets. One major step along the way is fundraising, and that starts with the pitch deck. So why do you need a pitch deck? Well, because a well-structured deck is the easiest way for you to explain your business to investors. It's a visual summary of your idea, the investment opportunity. Your job as a founder is to tell your story and to tell it well. It's how you get money, media coverage, and people willing to buy into whatever it is that you're offering. And the best founders that can tell a great story have an advantage. Your deck helps you distill that story into something that you can practice until it becomes something people really care about and employees can rally behind. From Steve to Anne to Tristan and, well, even Elizabeth Holmes, all great storytellers. Yes, Elizabeth is a counterexample to these other entrepreneurs, but she told a really great story. She raised hundreds of millions of dollars. She had the press in the palm of her hands, and of course, it all turned out to not be true. But you do not have to be Steve Jobs or wear a black turtleneck to tell a great story. There are a number of everyday rock star founders who come from us from all paths that's been able to tell a clear, concise, good investment story in order to score top investments, including Alex Batdorf, who is the founder of a female accelerator cleverly called Get Shit Done. Prior to running her accelerator, she was a founder who successfully raised $3 million from using a pitch deck that she often iterated on as she met with investors. And as her company gained traction, she updated her deck with new milestones, opportunities that delighted potential investors. Swish Analytics, an early stage sports betting and analytics startup that began as a side hustle. The three co-founders entered a number of pitch competitions using a deck, and when they gained enough traction and made key connections, they quit their day jobs to focus 100% on the business, and they got into the LA Dodgers accelerator. They've been successful in using their pitch decks to guide conversations with investors, and to date, they've been able to raise $6.7 million in investments. And Alexandra Zadarin, who grew up in Tijuana, she co-founded a startup called 8 Sleep, which is a New York-based sleep fitness company. She and her Italian co-founders first crafted their storytelling on Indiegogo, which led to over $1 million and over 6,000 backers. Since their launch on Indiegogo, they've been able to raise over $30 million from investors, and it all started with the pitch deck and telling the perfect story. So, what makes the perfect pitch deck? Well, there really is no such thing. There are a lot of great pitch decks out there for you to use as a reference and even some templates. But before you build, you want to build a narrative that maps out what you need to convey in your pitch deck in written form. Throughout the year, I run an in-person pitch deck workshop with HubSpot for startups. And this is the map worksheet that we give to founders starting from square one. We found that thinking through each of these blocks helps you think through the content needed and collect the key elements you want to convey in your deck before you build. Whether you use a map like this or write a more formal narrative, getting your business on paper helps with clarity of thought and forces you to really think about the collection of pieces that need to be included. Another suggestion for those that are just getting started is to work backwards from what you anticipate investors will ask. Creating a PR FAQ based on questions typically asked during investor meetings will also guide you on the elements you need to include. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the best example templates you can use as a reference. From Sequoia to Techstars to YC, these are all great frameworks I'd recommend. Each of them can help you figure out the placement order and key points, but blindly following a template is not the way to go. You want to use these examples as a baseline. Construct your story in a way that is clear, concise, inspiring, and fun, not some universal startup template story. In all of these deck templates, there is some version and variation of the following slides, starting with the cover. What's your big idea? What is the one thing you do better than anyone else? What is your business? Well, generally you have about 15 seconds to set the hook with investors. Here's a great 15-second example from a New York-based startup I absolutely love called Bonmo, which is a startup that helps enterprise brands stand out with humor in their content and branding by tapping into comedians on their platform. As a marketer, I can really appreciate their clean, fun design here. It pops in color and makes me excited to turn the page. And a good design also helps separate you from the others, and it tells your investors that you invested in your deck. A good design can also keep the reader engaged much longer than something just thrown together with clip art and PowerPoint template arrows. So next, the teaser. These are the highlights of your business and showcase the investment opportunity as a teaser for what's to come later in your pitch. Next, the problem page. As we all know, the best startups are those that solve a major problem. This is the message you want to convey on the problem page. What is the big problem you are solving and who are you solving it for? I look at a lot of pitch decks, and this is typically the page that I often see overcomplicated. Adding a lot of words and trendy jargon can confuse or even worse, turn off your reader. And this is the page you really want to be super clear and concise and hammer home why an investor should care and what they can expect to see from the rest of the deck. And quite honestly, why they should continue reading. Let's look at another example. This is from Airbnb's original pitch deck. Not only does it have a very clean design, but it states the problem very clearly. And of course, it follows up with the solution. Now we're getting into why your idea is the answer to the problem. This page should reflect how you're going to solve the problem and the benefits of your solution for your customers and your users. Still using the Airbnb example, same clean design and clear logic, you want to avoid going down the rabbit hole, showing all of the features in your solution. Leave that for later. Focus on the big picture. Not every line of code or bell and whistle needs to be showcased here. For even more simplicity, this is from the startup Bonmo. Again, clear to the point and speaks to their overall brand. For your product page, this is where you want to take a bit of a deep dive on the tool. Typically, I see this page being used as the how-to steps page. If you have an MVP or your product is already in the market, showcasing imagery of the product, especially if it's an app, goes really well here. But keep it simple. 3 steps is a suggested route. Okay, next, the business model. How will you make money? You should be thinking, cash rules everything around me. Yes, I just quoted Wu-Tang Clan. But I guarantee you this is what an investor is thinking about, the bottom line. How will you make money? And even if it's a freemium model, you want to think about revenue, even if it's pushed out a bit on your journey. Let's take a look at another example. Here we have LinkedIn. This both shows the value of the network and the revenue model in detail, which is still their essential business plan today. You have to have one, or at least an idea and some detail around it. If it's advertising, what do the ads sell for and why? If it's B2B, how will you charge? What is your margin? Consumer, same thing. How do you find them? What do they pay for? Or how is the product or service monetized? Here's an example from a company named Even. They've laid out both the value prop and their business model very simply. Next, factoring your total addressable market can be a tricky one, and I often see founders get tripped up here. You want to think about how much money you can make, even if you were able to dominate your target market. Onto the competition page. This page should showcase your competitors and why your product will win over the others is a key page in the deck. To me, this is always the fun page to create as a founder because this reinforces the big problem you're trying to solve and why your solution is better than the rest. Competition really is a good thing, and it shows an investor you've done your homework on the market. Plus, this helps incite FOMO to interested investors. Whether you use the petal diagram or something more common like the magic quadrant for your competition page, it's up to you. However, more often than not, founders that choose the magic quadrant often turn investors off because they move the variables so that they're all in the winning top right corner and their competitors are weakly positioned. You want to be honest here and realistic. I personally prefer a grid that's a comparison chart, something like this, that represents your key assets if you're super early and or you have big name competitors. It's clear to read, it doesn't warrant as many raised eyebrows as the magic quadrant, and it doesn't oversell your story. Using a grid also enables you to show how your startup beats out the competition in areas like its key benefits, go-to-market strategy, business model, and more. So, is your product working? Are you solving the problem you set out to solve? Now we're on the traction page. Not having enough traction is one of the reasons many startups are told why an investor passed on them. But was it really because of lack of traction or lack of showcasing the traction? This is the page you want to detail proof measured in users and sales that people love your product. If you're pre-revenue or building a freemium service, you can still show traction you've been able to garner through signups and active users, even if it's a first adoption tester. Let's look at another example. This is from Wanderjaunt's seed deck. They used what they had at the time to show some traction, but I also like the testimonials to add a bit more oomph to the traction numbers. You can see people, even at the earliest phases of their journey, are connecting with their ideas and services. Okay, back to cash, but a deeper dive focusing on the projections and the best guess of how much money you will make in the next 3 to 5 years. And of course, if you're already showing cash positive, this is where you want to showcase your success. This is not always included in seed decks, but if you do add it, choose carefully what financial metrics you talk about in the deck, and especially during meetings. Investors will take note of everything you say and try to detect trends in your business. You want to be the deciding point on what trends they get to detect. Keep in mind, investors run numbers all day, and they probably run them in their sleep. So if you include these details, be prepared to see this as a page that they spend the most time on. All right, so now we're moving on to the team page. This is the one that's often looked at the longest as well. Many investors would tell you that they do not invest in products, they invest in people. This is your chance to showcase the talents of your team and highlight that you have the hunger and expertise to transform your idea into a large, profitable business. I often see this page filled with lots of advisors. Many investors will tell you they care less about advisors and want to understand the founders and the people who are putting in the bulk of the time into the business. For solo entrepreneurs like myself, this is your opportunity to highlight your strength and background as someone that can get the job done on your own. Here's an example. This is not the best looking team page slide, but it does show the track record of the Square team. They brought a lot of experience to the table and wanted to make sure that they highlighted that right up front. This was their third slide in the deck, by the way. In short, tell the story you have. What makes you unique or better? In the case of Square, it was large part because of their team. The flip side of this is adding all kinds of credentials to your team that aren't really earned. If you're a solo entrepreneur and or you do want to show your advisors, here's a good example from Bonmo. It's clear on the core team and it's clear on the advisor. Next is the ask page. What are you looking for? How much money do you need? And what will you do with it? Investors are definitely going to ask this, so it's best to have a clear idea on what you need and how long it's going to last. This gives the investor confidence that you've thought about your business, thought about the needs, and you have outlined a clear path to the next milestone with their investment, should you get it. Let's look at another example from the bond mode deck. It's super clear how they plan to spend the money, and again, it's well designed. For the last page, this is where you restate the highlights of your business and the investment opportunity as a closer and have a clear call to action. This is another good page to incite final FOMO. So those are typically the pages we see in seed decks. Some people stick religiously to 10, others to 14, some have an appendix. We just viewed what could be a pitch deck of 13. Here's our overall lineup. If you were to combine the cover and the summary into one page and kill the final summary, you'll have 11. Some founders put team at the front, some put them at the end. How to build a pitch deck is no closely held secret. The information is there for everyone, which begs the question, why do some decks succeed and others go down in flames? To dig into the data behind what investors look for in pitch decks, earlier today I chatted with Russ Heddleston, co-founder and CEO of DocSend. Let's take a look. So, Russ, you shared this data with me before, and I feel like every time I see it, there's always something really interesting that comes about, super valuable information. As we think about your pitch deck when you were fundraising for DocSend, what was the one page in your deck that you felt like really pushed the needle to get you funded?
Help make the difference? Yeah, I think it's different for everyone's company. For us, when we were starting DocSend, we had a very strong team. I have two co-founders, also software engineers, and so the very first page of our deck was the team. We were really putting team front and center. And so you would actually see it in the viewing behavior where some people would just get to the team page and like, I'll take the meeting. They didn't even get to the rest of the deck. So for us, that was really putting our best foot forward.
Great. And as we're heading on to a new year, when we think about nuances in seed decks, are you seeing anything new? What about videos or anything like that that are happening in seed decks?
Yeah, everything is always constantly changing. One of the things that hasn't changed is people continue to use decks to describe their businesses and to do that matchmaking with investors. But we've definitely been seeing a higher rate of just seed fundraising. So just the number of visits, the number of views, the number of seed firms that are out there as well. And so it's becoming a hotter and hotter space. There are just more and more companies that are able to get funded, especially at that seed round.
Got it. And what are your thoughts about videos? I know sometimes founders like to send those explainer videos. They pop them in their PDF, they pop them in their slides. Maybe they attach in an email. What are your thoughts about videos and seed decks?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I love video, and I think it's a really great way, especially if you present well or if you have a very graphic product like that just really caters well to some companies. So I think we do see them in decks, and people send them as a side along. What it doesn't do is it doesn't replace the need to have a deck with some of those basics in there, just like team, market, competition. If people are interested in the category, then they'll dive in and they'll take time to go through the longer video. But it's not the very first page type of thing.
Got it. And when I was looking for an investor, I had a slimmer deck that I would use maybe for email. I had a little bit of a longer deck that I would use for maybe large customer acquisition. And then I had like the full deck for like pitch meetings. What are your thoughts about multiple decks?
I think that's a great question because it's one of those like getting into the weeds types of things that every founder just has to manage that. So what we see typically is two versions. One will be the kind of slimmer send-ahead version of the deck that doesn't have appendix pages in it or anything like that. And the purpose of that deck is to get the meeting. And so you're not sharing everything about your company, you're sharing just enough to convince the investor that they would like to learn more. And then there'll typically be the full deck that'll also include appendix pages. And people have opinions both ways on to send or not send those appendix pages. At least what we've seen has been you need the investor to understand what your business is overall, and then they're only interested in diving into those appendix pages if they're going to spend more time with you.
Got it. So we run a number of pitch competitions in our lofts in San Francisco and New York. And some of the things that we always like to ask investors when they show up are, what are like the deadly sins to pitch decks? Yeah. And so we've collected some of those, and I thought that maybe we could take a look at some of those together.
Absolutely.
So as we look at this slide here, it's called 7 Deadly Sins, give or take. There's 10 on here. Anything here that you would disagree or agree with on this list? So like number one, bearing the lead, kitchen sink deck, a few things on here.
Oh my gosh, this is a great list. We could spend hours going through this whole thing. So just some things that jump out. Number one on that list is a really good point. We see a lot of decks where people will jump into the details, but they like miss and they miss having the elevator pitch. Like, what is it you do? So I think for a lot of startups, founders, as they're putting together their deck, make sure that if you have that 15-second elevator pitch, like that comes across when someone's reading your deck.
Yep. Perfect. Something on here, me personally as a marketer, number 8, design and grammar really do matter. I don't know your thoughts about well-designed decks, grammar obviously, but what are your thoughts about paying someone, a graphic designer, to like really give it a good look?
Well, design is important. So, I mean, you and I have been to some of these pitch deck teardown sessions where, you can kind of see investors in real time going through, and if it's not very well designed, people are kind of like, it's just kind of a vote against you. On the other hand, there are diminishing returns to having it be the world's best designed deck, So I don't think you necessarily need to go hire an expensive agency to put together your deck design. You do want it to be unique to your company. You want it to present itself well and be, coherent and consistent. So you should definitely put a little effort in there, but you, again, don't need to go too far on it.
Sure. Anything that's missing here that you would add?
Ooh, well, the pretending you don't have competition, that's definitely a good one. I would also say, like, market size, it's different for every company. I would say you just don't want an investor to ask a question that seems obvious to them that catches you flat-footed. So they don't want to think that they already know something about your business that you don't know. Like, you should be the expert about your business. So that's where the appendix slides can be really helpful. Someone thinks they get you an aha moment or gotcha moment, and you're like, nope, I actually already thought about this.
I got you instead. Got it. Okay, great. Thanks, Russ, so much for joining us. Always appreciate having conversations with you. But before you go, I understand that you have a gift for our audience.
Yes, I do. So there are a lot of things to worry about when you're a startup, and DocSend wants to make your life as a founder easier. So we're offering 6 months of DocSend for free by going to try.docsend.com/startups. And just a little bit on why DocSend is so useful as a founder, especially when you're fundraising early on. We say that you have the minimum viable product. There's also the minimum viable PowerPoint, the MVPPT. When you build that for your company, if you use DocSend to send it, you'll get to see how long people are looking at each page in that deck, who they forward it to, as well as aggregate stats about where people are getting stuck. So if people are really getting stuck in your product pages, you'll see that in the data, and then you'll know, maybe that's something I want to clarify. Also, if security is a concern, you are able to see that forwarding path, and you're able to turn off links after you send them. So you can really keep control of that document. And as you're iterating and coming out with new versions, you can update them in DocSend, and every link you've ever sent is always up to date. So DocSend tries to make that process a little bit easier for you as a founder. And if you want to give DocSend a try, go to try.docsend.com/startups. DocSend as a company gets used for a lot of pitch decks being sent around, and we've actually partnered with Harvard Business School to do a lot of research around what works, what doesn't work, and this is across thousands of companies that have raised billions of dollars. So we'll dive in. Before we do, just a little bit of my own background and who I am and why this is a topic I am able to speak to. So as I said, the CEO at DocSend, this is the second company I've started. The first company was called Pursuit.com. I went through and raised $500K and seed money for that. I think I did absolutely everything wrong possible. And we got the deal done. We ended up selling the company to Facebook. And then I left Facebook and started DocSend. And DocSend has raised $15 million in total. All located in San Francisco. But a lot of the learnings I had from Pursuit, I just became really curious, like, how does startup fundraising work? What is anecdotal? What is advice? But then also just what does the data say about these decks? And so all the companies that are in this data set have opted in. They've agreed to be part of it. And we're very appreciative to those founders for allowing these stats to be used to give back to the community. So there are a few different ways to look at this data. So the way it works is that when startup founders are sending their pitch deck around, they'll send it as a DocSend link, and we'll track how long they're viewing it and where they forward it. And one of the things that's interesting about pitch decks is just how long they're looked at. So across our whole data set, the average pitch deck is looked at for about 3 minutes and 44 seconds, which on the one hand is a lot of time, and on the other hand, it's not very much time at all. For context, especially in the context of DocSend, pitch decks are really important in your fundraising process because it tells the investor enough about your company to let them know if they want to take that meeting. And it also, allows you to go through the process of like, how do you represent your business? And so we definitely recommend everyone use a pitch deck. It saves everyone time. But as you're going through and pouring your life into your deck, creating this thing, just remember, it's not actually going to be looked at all that much. So, people really flip through it quickly, and about 12% of people are looking at it on their mobile phone. So when you're building this thing, remember, it's going to be short. It's not going to be looked at a whole lot, and some people are going to be looking at it on their mobile phones, so you can't be too information dense. So a couple other aggregate stats across this. This is specific to seed and pre-seed fundraising, which is just very early on at your company. And the pitch decks that were successful in raising money were on average about 19 pages. So that includes some appendix pages, but that's kind of a good average length. And then again, the average view time of a little over 3 minutes. So one of the things that I found really helpful for Pursuit and for DocSend was just going around to other founders and asking them like, hey, how do I make a pitch deck? What do I put in the pitch deck? And people have opinions one way or the other. But one of the things I was really curious about is if we look across, these thousands of decks, what do other people put in their decks if they're able to successfully fundraise for their seed or pre-seed round? So what we're looking at here is we took Sequoia Capital has kind of a recommendation on how you put together a business plan. And so they have a couple different categories for pages. So like the problem that you're solving or the solution that you're bringing to market. And so we went through the decks and coded the pages to say this page is a competition page or this page is a problem page. And then we were able to see across all these decks if they have that category of page or not, and if they do include it, how many pages are in there. So what's interesting about this is that the only category that 100% of companies had was the team slide. And I should also note that these are usually kind of landscape-oriented documents. They're not the kind of, like a big white paper type of thing. They're usually like a deck, so created in like PowerPoint or Keynote or Google Slides. But team is the only one that 100% of the decks actually had a team page. And that kind of makes sense, I guess, if you're an early stage company, there needs to be someone behind this, someone who's working on it. The runner-up there was the product section, which had 96% of the decks actually had one or more product pages. On average, they had 5 product pages in there. This is also showing you the average ordering of the slides in the deck. So usually when I work with startups or talk to companies, I always say that the ordering should be unique to your company. But if you're just getting started and you're not sure what else to do, like this is just a great way to kind of go through it or work on the first iteration of your deck. So company purpose, moving on to problem, moving on to solution, why now? Most people have in their market size slide that just says, yeah, this is a big problem we're trying to solve. Product, team, business model, competition, and then financials. Financials also include anything about traction. So if you've got early customers or some other numbers that are in there, those all go into the financial section as well. Remember, this is the average across everything. So team ends up being in the middle here on average, but it's actually the case that it's usually at the beginning or the end of the deck. And it kind of depends on if they're really leaning into who their team is or if it's something that kind of comes at the very end. So I love looking at this too. A lot of the people who participated in this research were unable to raise and they had to shut down their company. But because they used DocSend for that, we were able to use those stats and compare successful decks and unsuccessful decks and see specifically how is that viewing behavior different between those two types of decks. When you're starting a company, the fear here is you're going to be spending tons of time on this. You're not going to be able to raise money. And then you have to get a job, right? So we all want to be successful in our fundraising. And so like looking between these, there are some really great learnings to take away. So the pink here is the failed decks. Now, a lot of people think that the more time you spend reading a deck, the better, right? I sent you the deck, you read the deck for longer, that should be great. What we actually see in this data is that it's not actually great if someone spends more time than less time. So you'll notice in the successful decks, it's much more even. So people are kind of just going flip, flip, flip. And then when you go through those decks, if you look at them, and there are some example decks that DocSend has up online, they kind of make sense, right? You're kind of going through, you're like, oh, this is intuitive, I got it. In the failed decks, what you'll notice is there's a spike in viewing time on a couple different sections: the team, the product, and the financials. And I was kind of curious about this too, especially for the product ones. I found that as I was looking through some of these decks, again, these are all people who've opted in, I also felt myself looking at the pages for longer because I wasn't sure what they did. And I think there's a great takeaway here that a great pitch deck will feel very natural. You're just going to be flowing through it. And if someone gets stuck on something, if they're spending too much time reading it, it's actually a sign of confusion. So when you're going through and you're creating your deck and you're getting feedback on your deck, just remember that, yeah, you want it to seem obvious, and anything that's too confusing, you want to like dig in there and try to make it feel more intuitive to the people who are going through and reading them. Also, financials, kind of going at the end on average. Remember, not every company needs to have financials. Only 58% did. But if it doesn't look that great for you, and this can be traction, it doesn't have to be like just your financial numbers. People are going to spend more time looking at that. So be very, very sensitive to what you actually include there in your financials. So two of the categories of pages that I think were really kind of underutilized by startups in general are the why now and why us slides. And if we go back, we can actually see that only 46% of these pitch decks included a why now slide, but a lot more of those, there are a lot more why now slides in the successful decks than in the failed decks. And then the why us as well. So if you're an investor and you're looking at putting a lot of money into a company, there are a lot of ideas out there. Why now? And then why you specifically? So that's another thing. Just remember, and when in doubt, include why now and why us slides in your pitch deck. So coming back to the how much time people spend in your pitch decks, it's not necessarily a great sign if someone's spending a much longer time reading your deck. What is a really good sign is when they come back to your deck again and again. So, the general workflow is like you send your deck off to an investor, they take a read through, and they say, you know what, great, I'll take the meeting. And so then if they have a meeting with you and it goes well, they're going to go back to that deck again. And if they also like it, they're probably going to send it to their other partners at their firm, or they might send it to someone else to get feedback. So you're going to see a lot more views on your deck if you're on track to actually fundraise. And if it's just not a fit, you'll actually see that in your viewing stats as well on DocSend. They take a look, they don't take the meeting, they don't come back to the deck. That's a pretty bad sign. So another area that people always ask about, and this has been true for both my companies, is like, when during the year do people fundraise? I've heard it said like VCs always go on vacation in August. And so we looked across our data set trying to answer that question, like, when do people actually raise money during the year? Are there any bad times to raise? Are there any really great times to raise? And if you have the luxury of deciding when to raise, when should you do that? And so what we can see here is that there are actually like two basically fundraising seasons during the year. One is in October and November, and then the other one's in March. So those are the big spikes. But kind of throughout the year, people are raising almost every single month. Probably the worst month here is December. And this both includes the decks that are sent as well as the investors that are looking at those decks. And you'll see they're not always the same. So you have the most decks being sent in October and the most visits to those decks in November. And timing wise, it'll take you 4 weeks on average to raise a round of funding. So people are kind of viewing your deck over a long period of time. Diving in a little deeper here, you could actually see that in January and February, if you actually send out your deck, then you're gonna get the most visits to it. And what you can see here is that there just aren't as many founders who are sending off their pitch decks in January and February, but investors are actually very, very happy to look at them. December is not a great month to fundraise, is one way to look at this. And then January and February are probably the least utilized months during the year. So if you're looking at fundraising and you have some leeway in when you can do that, I'd say hit the ground running in January or February. Get your deck together over the holidays and get it sent out, because investors are willing and very interested to take a look through. So if we were going to boil a lot of this down and just have 6 key takeaways, like here's what you should keep in mind as a startup founder. keep your deck 20 pages or fewer. Remember, the pitch deck is something that's used to get you the meeting. It doesn't have to be a manifesto answering everything about your business. It's really just, is there enough here that there could be a fit and you want the investor to take the meeting? Also, even though 20 pages or fewer, keep in mind that people are going to be flipping through it pretty quickly, so you don't want to have a lot of information density on the pages. It needs to be able to just read the headlines and to move through the deck from section to section. Raising seed money takes longer than most people think. So on average, it takes about 3 months or so on average to raise a seed round of funding. So you need to make sure you budget time accordingly. You need to have at least 6 months of runway left. So the first 3 months you can go off and fundraise, and if it doesn't work, then you've got 3 months of runway left to figure it out, reduce your burn or try to fundraise again. Seeds versus firms. This has been covered before, but if you can go with a seed firm, they'll be faster, they'll give you more money quicker than if you go do an angel round. Something also that's interesting in the data that DocSend has is around the amount of investor meetings you need with your pitch deck in order to actually raise. So if you can get 30 meetings, that's usually enough of a signal. And if you have 30 real meetings where they actually go through your pitch deck, take a look through, you should be able to get to a yes or a no there. And you get diminishing returns when you go above that. So you don't need to be contacting hundreds of investors. You can usually get to a yes or a no much faster than that. And finally, spend time on your deck. If you have a few extra minutes here or there to actually go through it, make sure your team slide looks really nice. Another thing we found in the successful decks is that you want to link off to your LinkedIn, make it easy for people to find you, and again, say why your team is the right team to be solving this big problem out there. And then if you do include any financials in your pitch deck or any traction, just keep in mind that that's something that people are going to spend a lot of time looking at. And so you want to be pretty buttoned up on how you represent yourself there as well. This is just a little bit of the research that DocSend has done into fundraising. There's a lot more online, and DocSend will be continuing to do more research on this. So you can go check it out at docsend.com and a number of other locations as well.
So there you have it. In closing, the last tip I like to reinforce is iterate, iterate, iterate. Going back to the example of Alex Battorf I mentioned earlier, you should consider your deck a living document that gets updated over time when you hit key milestones and gain traction. It's a doc that should always be in draft mode and ready to send at a moment's notice. When ready to pitch in person, do dry runs, set your Alexa timer for 5 minutes and see if you go over. When I practiced my pitch, I did it in front of past coworkers and people that I knew wouldn't pacify me because I was related to them. I also recorded myself so I can watch my facial reactions and listen to the inflection of my voice. And funny enough, I actually practiced my pitch to my dog. And the minute he walked out of the room, I realized I wasn't exciting enough. In short, if you don't critically evaluate, you haven't learned. Every foul pitch is an opportunity to learn. And leverage opportunities like pitch competitions so that you are polished before you get to the high value pitches. But do keep in mind, your job is to build a product, not just a pitch deck. Don't forget that. You need a good deck, you need to practice, but don't spend all of your time tweaking slides and losing sight of tweaking your product. Thank you for your time today, and best of luck on your journey to getting funded.